You're richer on paper than ever before. Home values are up. Your equity has never looked higher. But that money disappears the moment you try to use it. Sell your home and your costs reset. Borrow against it and your risk increases. Hold it and it just sits there, untouchable. So where did your wealth actually go? If your home gained hundreds of thousands in value, why does it feel like you can't spend any of it without making your situation worse? And more importantly, why does turning equity into cash feel more expensive than keeping it locked inside the house? In this video, we're going to break down why home equity looks like real wealth on paper, but behaves very differently in reality, and why for many homeowners, it's not the financial freedom they think it is. Equity is not money. It's a position. When people talk about home equity, they talk about it like it's money. My house went up $300,000. I've built real wealth. And on paper, that's true. Your home has increased in value. Your net worth has gone up. But nothing about your actual financial position has changed. Because equity is not money. It's a number attached to an asset you haven't exited. Why equity feels like cash. The reason this is so confusing is because equity is presented like it's usable. You see it in apps. You see it in estimates. You hear it in headlines. Trillions in homeowner equity. It's framed as if that money is sitting there waiting to be accessed. But equity doesn't sit anywhere. It exists only under one condition, that someone else is willing to pay that price and you're willing to sell. Until that happens, it's theoretical. The missing step no one talks about. There's a step most people skip mentally: value to money. They assume those are the same. They're not. Between value and money, there's a transaction. And that transaction changes everything. Because the moment you try to turn value into money, you leave your current position. You give something up to make that number real. Equity is a position you're sitting in. A better way to think about equity is not as cash, but as a position. You bought into a market at a certain time, at a certain price, with a certain rate. That position has improved, but you're still inside it. You haven't realized anything. You haven't converted anything. You're just holding a better version of the same position. Why this matters more now? In previous markets, this distinction didn't matter as much, because converting equity into money didn't disrupt your life that much. You could sell, buy something similar, and keep moving. Today, that gap is massive. The moment you exit your position, you don't step sideways. You step into a different market. Higher rates, higher costs, less flexibility. Which means equity isn't just hard to access, it's expensive to access. The illusion at the center of it. This is the illusion most homeowners are living with. They feel wealthier because their home is worth more, but their ability to act hasn't improved. In some cases, it's gotten worse, because the better their position looks on paper, the harder it is to replace in reality. So when you say, "I have a lot of equity," what you're really saying is, "I'm sitting on value that only becomes real if I'm willing to give up what I already have." And in this market, that's a trade most people don't want to make. Because equity isn't money, it's a position. And until you leave that position, it doesn't change what you can actually do. But the real problem isn't that equity isn't money, it's what happens the moment you try to turn it into one. The moment you try to use it, you lose it. And this is where the illusion breaks. Because the moment you stop looking at equity as a number and try to turn it into something usable, you run into the real structure of the market. There are only a few ways to access equity. You sell, you borrow, or you stay. And none of those paths turn equity into free money. Selling, when profit turns into replacement cost. Selling feels like the cleanest option. You cash out, you realize the gain, you walk away with money. But that only works if you don't need another place to live.
because the moment you re-enter the market, your profit gets repriced. You're buying into the same environment that created your equity. Higher home values, higher rates, higher total cost. So the gain you thought you made doesn't increase your purchasing power. It just keeps you in place at a higher price level. And after transaction costs, taxes, and moving expenses, you're often left with less flexibility than before, not more. Borrowing, turning stability into risk. If selling doesn't work, borrowing seems like the alternative. Take out a HELOC, do a cash-out refinance, tap into the value without leaving the home. But this changes the nature of your position. You're taking something that was passive and turning it into something active, a new monthly obligation, a variable rate, exposure to market conditions you were previously insulated from. Your equity doesn't disappear, but it transforms from a stable buffer into leveraged risk. And once you add leverage, you lose the protection that made holding the home valuable in the first place.
Doing nothing, the most common outcome. So most homeowners choose the third option. They do nothing. They don't sell, they don't borrow, they just hold. And on the surface, that feels safe. No new risk, no new costs. But there's a trade-off here too. Because equity that isn't used doesn't improve your flexibility. It doesn't increase your mobility. It doesn't expand your options. It just sits there, growing in value but shrinking in usefulness. The core trade-off no one escapes. Every path to accessing equity forces the same decision. You either give up your current position or you weaken it. You can't extract the value without changing the structure that created it. And in this market, that structure is unusually favorable for those who already own. Low fixed payments, relative stability, protection from rising costs. The moment you touch that structure, you lose part of that advantage. Why this feels so frustrating? This is why homeowners feel stuck. They're told they've built wealth. They see the numbers, but when they try to act on it, nothing improves. Because the system doesn't reward conversion. It rewards holding. And that's a very different kind of wealth than most people expect. So yes, your equity is real, but the moment you try to use it, it stops behaving like money. It becomes a trade between liquidity and stability, between flexibility and cost. And in most cases, it's a trade that leaves you worse off than staying exactly where you are. Why homeowners feel rich but can't move. By this point, the pattern becomes clear. Homeowners didn't misunderstand equity because they weren't paying attention. They misunderstood it because the system changed around them. The illusion of getting richer. On paper, they are richer. Their home is worth more. Their net worth has increased. Their position looks stronger than ever. And that creates a very real feeling. Progress, security, success. But that feeling comes from a number that hasn't been tested, because the moment it is, everything changes. Why wealth doesn't translate into freedom. Real wealth gives you options. You can move, you can adapt, you can respond to changes in your life. But equity doesn't do that, not in this market, because every path that converts it into action comes with a cost that cancels out the benefit. Sell, and your cost of living resets. Borrow, and your risk increases. Hold, and your options stay limited. So even as the number grows, your flexibility doesn't. And over time, that gap becomes impossible to ignore. The quiet collapse of mobility. This is where the impact becomes structural. Homeowners stop moving, not because they don't want to, but because every alternative is worse. So they stay in homes that no longer fit. They delay decisions they would have made before. They optimize around what they already have instead of what they actually need. Mobility doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes slowly.
And when enough people stop moving, the entire market changes with them. Why this doesn't feel like a problem yet. The most dangerous part of this shift is how stable it feels. There's no crash, no urgency, no obvious break, just fewer transactions, fewer choices, less movement. From the outside, it looks like a strong market. From the inside, it feels like limited options. The trap at the center of it. Homeowners aren't holding because they're greedy. They're holding because they're rational. They've run the numbers. They've seen the alternatives. And staying is the least damaging option. But when the best decision is to not move at all, that's no longer a flexible system. That's a constraint. So yes, your home built equity, but that equity didn't give you freedom. It gave you a position that's harder to replace. And in this market, what matters isn't how much your home is worth, it's how easily you can change your situation. For most homeowners right now, that answer is simple. You can't. And if that feels uncomfortable to hear, it's probably because most people are still looking at housing the way it used to work. I'm going to keep breaking this down, piece by piece, so you can see where this is actually heading, not where people hope it goes. So if you want to follow that, you can subscribe. No rush, just don't miss the next part. Thanks for being here.